All right, so here's our Vidly application. Now, if you look at the customers module, you can see here on the top, we're defining this customer model. And below that, we have our route handlers. And then after all these route handlers, we have this validate customer function. So this is a fairly simple application. And in this module, we have 86 lines of code. If you look at the definition of the customer object or the customer model, this is not a big complex model. In a real-world application, our customer model is going to be more complex. So the code in this module is going to grow. So that's something that we need to address in this lecture. To keep our applications maintainable, we should ensure that each module is responsible for only one thing. That is the single responsibility principle in practice. In this application, this customers module that we have is part of the routes folder. So technically, all we should have in this module is the definition of our customers' routes. The definition of a customer object doesn't really belong in this module. So in this lecture, we're going to extract this code and put it somewhere else. So I've created this models folder. In this folder, we're going to have modules like customer.js, genre.js, and so on. So let's add a new file here, customer.js. Now back in customers.js, I'm going to move the definition of the customer model inside our new module. So let's move that here. Now here we have a dependency to Mongoose. So let's go back here. On the top, this is the line for loading Mongoose. We also need to load Joy, as you will see in a second. So I'm going to copy these two lines and paste them in this new module. Now back in our customers module, I'm also going to move the function for validating a customer inside our new module. So cut and paste it here at the end. So now we have the single responsibility principle in practice. Our customer module has all the code for defining and validating a customer object. It knows what a customer should look like. Our customers.js module knows all about various routes to work with customers. So here we don't have any code other than handling express routes, okay? So also that means we no longer need to load Joy in this module because validating a customer object is now the responsibility of this new module, customer.js, okay? Now, finally, at the end of this module, we need to export this customer class as well as this validate customer function. So we write module that exports. We add customer here in this object. Or a shorter way is to simply use the export property. So earlier I told you that exports is a reference to module.exports. So we can simply add extra properties in that object. Similarly, we need to export this validate function. We can make the name shorter. So instead of validate customer, we can use validate. And we set this to validate customer. Okay. Now, back in our old module, here we have two choices. One is to load the customer module like this. So constant customer, we set this to require. Now here we need to go one level up and then go to the models folder and then load the customer module. So this customer module, this object has two properties. One is customer, the other is validate. So if we load this customer module like this, in order to reference the customer type or the customer model, we have to write code like this. So customer module dot customer. And you can see this looks really ugly. So a better approach is to use object destructuring. So this object that is returned from loading this module, you know that it has two properties, customer and validate. We can destructure that object and load it into these two constants, customer and validate. So we put the curly braces here when defining these constants. And with this customer constant will be set to what is returned from this module dot customer. Okay, so we don't have to repeat dot customer in several places. Similarly, this validate property will be set to what is returned from this module dot validate. Okay. Now finally, we need to replace this validate customer with validate, which is a shorter name, and cleaner. Here's another reference that we need to update. So validate. Now with this change, if you look at the number of lines of code we have in this module, look, we have 57 lines. So initially we had over 80 lines of code, and now we have about 50 lines of code. So as an exercise, I want you to modify the genres module. So in routes, here we have genres. Similarly, here on the top, we have the definition of the genre model. I want you to extract this code and put it in a separate module.